general question for both of you guys. As far as the information that you guys obtain to form the viewpoints that you have, where do you get that information, and from what kind of sources do you use to determine your points of view on things?
Well, you have several points. One is you have public hearings on everything you go through a bill. You get inputs of pros and cons. You find out who's, what, when, where, why, and how people are approaching this. The other thing is, if you have a good lobbyist, and that's something you have to demand on a lobbyist, they should tell you who's for, who's against, why they're for, why they're against, and so on and so forth. But they will give their point of view, but they will also give you the point of view of the other people, because that's a good lobbyist. If they don't do that, and you don't have a good lobbyist, and you've got the red flag waving. The last thing is this example on the GMO situation. We had 4 scientists in. These were genetic scientists from Oregon State and the University of California. So I think they're probably pretty good. I mean, I know they're a lot better than I am when it comes to genetics, but everyone has an opinion. So even scientists, they have an opinion.
When Sal said, that was a revelation to me when I got to the legislature, that there could be such a thing as a good lobbyist. Because when I came in thinking, okay, the lobby is going to be a bunch of people who are trying to just, mess with you somehow and push you in one direction or another. There actually is such a thing as a good lobbyist, in the same way there's such a thing as a good attorney who can define. No,
that's hard to grasp too.
I'm trying to. Really, there are good attorneys. If you ever been in trouble,
Richards over here.
Yeah, if you ever been in trouble and you have a good attorney, you know how important it is to have a good attorney. But a good lobbyist will actually come into your office and say, look, here's what this bill does. Here's who I'm representing, so you know who I'm representing right off the bat. Here's what the bill does. Here's who's opposing the bill, and they'll actually list out the contact information for the people opposing the bill, so you can contact those people as well. But one of the best things about being a legislator, in my view, is if you've got a curious mind, it's like being a kid in a candy store. In fact, you have to be a little bit careful in committee, because if you start asking a certain line of question in a committee, the next day there'll be somebody in your office with like 6 binders of information on whatever you're asking questions on. We've got staff people that work in the building. Each one of us has our own office staff, and they do research on things at our request. They also have committee administrators, which are remarkable people to that. I mean, I would just
very talented.
Just very talented, very bright people. And then we have like a legislative fiscal office, legislative revenue office as well. So, I mean, seriously, if you're curious about something, in fact, I remember my first session, I was on economic development, trade economic development, and the discussion was on trade with Mexico. And I think I asked 3 questions on Oregon's trade with Mexico. And the next day, there was a guy in my office going, okay, what do you want to know? I can tell you this, I can tell you this, I can tell you what companies are involved, I can give you their phone numbers. So that part of it is fantastic. That part of it is kind of like whatever you're interested in, you will find somebody who can not only give you really good information, but tell you kind of the breadth of information that's available for it. So that part I find really.
And legislative revenue and legislative fiscal are just fascinating to me, because I remember I think it was my first term, maybe it was my first term, but my first session, that I was on redoing our tax structure, revenue restructuring. And that is a very difficult thing to approach. It took us a 2-year approach, by the way, to do this. And to ask someone, okay, now, I'll use this example. Let's say that we wanted to have a 5% sales tax that was limited by the Constitution, that the people were the only ones that could move it. But we did away with property taxes of $1 million or less in value. That's the trade-off. What does that do to Oregon? And believe it or not, they come up with the answers, and how they get that, I have no idea. But like, I think in that particular scenario, we ended up with a positive $364 million a year, but yet everyone lost. They didn't have any property taxes on their own personal residence per se, just commercial was the only one that did. And we had a 5% sales tax. The reason we picked up the $364 million is because of the 10% underground. You have 10% of the population working under the table, so once they spend that money, they get taxed on it. So it makes it a fair and equal tax. Although that'll never fly in Oregon because I think I've been alive now, we've gone through 7 of those. And since I've been alive.
No, okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
And every one, the closest one I think was 25% of the population were for it.
Right.
75% was against it. So it's just not going to happen.
You also tend to get a lot of information from your colleagues or on different committees because you only serve on a couple committees. So there'll be something that's in front of business and labor, and it'll be an issue that I have no idea on, and I'll get a call from a company and talent, and they'll say, hey, this is going to impact us this way and this way, and I'll go to Sal and say, what's going on with this bill? What's happening with that bill? And he can tell me, well, here's the testimony we heard, you might want to talk to this guy and this guy, or he can tell me, don't worry about it, it's not going to pass, and I can call back the guy in town and say, it's not going to pass. So you get a lot of information from lobbyists because that's what they're paid to do. You get a lot of information from staff and really excellent people working. In fact, I really recommend for folks who are like trying to look for, it's kind of part-time work, but you should look at the state capitol as a place to get some part-time work. It's really challenging and really fascinating. You meet some really, really fascinating people. They basically plunge you into a subject area that you have to get very knowledgeable about if you're going to be of service to the process. So I mean, that part's fascinating, and you get information from your colleagues.
And the information from your colleagues is, to me, very, very important because your colleagues, they understand that you're in a situation of where you rely upon them, and you end up trusting one another very, very implicitly. I get the biggest kick out of on my first session up there. I had a call from a lady, and I answered the phone. My staff sent the phone call back to my desk, and she said, I want to know about Bill 3285. That's what it was. It was dead silence. Well, there's about 5,000 bills right there, and I remember 3284 and below, but I just didn't memorize this one, And she actually thought that we were supposed to sit down and read every bill.
Can't.
You don't do that.
Just can't.
First of all, your brain would be like tapioca pudding after one session. But second of all, the only bills you read are the ones that come to your committee and ones that go to the floor.
Yep, or the ones you're sponsoring. Yeah,
That's right. Those are the only ones that you read. And I'll tell you why, because out of 5,000 bills that float through that place in a session, maybe 800 pass.
Yep.
So why would you clutter your mind up with 4,200 bills that you didn't have to?
Do you guys choose the committees that you're on?
The Speaker of the House chooses it for the Senate President. He chooses it for the Senate members. So even you get to lobby for it. You get to say, look, this is my passion. This is what I really want to do. I'm on the Budget Committee, even though I begged them not to put me on the Budget Committee. I turned it down 3 times, and still now I go on the Budget Committee. That's a longer story. But it really does that. You count your colleagues even to the point. There's an issue. I think we disagree on the Cougar issue. Oregon has a Cougar management plan, which I think the science on the Cougar management plan is questionable, and I think Sal backs the Cougar management plan. So I've been always against changing it and allowing us to go back to practices which I think are going to be detrimental to the Cougar population. But I'll have Republican members come to on the House floor and go, Buckley, don't vote for this because it has to do with the management plan, and you're against the management plan. I'll say, well, thank you, I didn't know that. And I'll look at the bill and say, yeah, you're right. They're protecting my consistency with my vote. I appreciate that.
Yeah, and the only time and I don't care because a cougar is fine as long as it isn't detrimental to our wildlife. But once their population grows to the point of where your wildlife starts to decline, then it's time you need to take some action and thin out that population. Not exterminate it, because extermination just isn't the right thing to do. But same with the wolf. It's going to be an interesting thing for people in Northeast Oregon because one individual lost 26 sheep in one night because a wolf got in the pen and killed 26 sheep. Because why? Because that's what they're made to do. They're made to kill stuff. So didn't eat anything, just killed them.